everybody. Well, I hope you get to join in our impromptu and very spontaneous chat. It's Tuesday where I am, and currently I'm going to be talking with another of Jamaica's scientists, up and coming scientists, Danielle Nembhard. She's a marine and environmental scientist. And I just have a fascination to just learn so much more from our young and upcoming scientists. Today, we're going to be talking about the environment and aquaculture and our environment. I listened to a talk today on the importance of aquatic foods and aquaculture, and the UN World Fish had a very good summit on demystifying the term aquatic foods and why it's so important, especially for our Caribbean region. And we know that aquaculture needs to grow. It needs to continue playing an important role in our Caribbean region, and the sustainability of both captured fisheries and aquaculture must be a top priority in the region. So as we produce more, we increase growth and demand, we have a risk in the environmental degradation, as we've seen in the fisheries sector. So today, Dania and I are going to be talking about the environment and aquaculture, and I'm going to try and get her in. Hi, Danny.
Hello. I have to get this camera so that my seat is very low.
Oh, okay.
Hi, how are you?
It was great to meet you.
Same here, absolutely.
I love this platform so much. I get to meet scientists from Jamaica.
I know, and I mean, people are like, "Hey, Danny, you want to do a live?" I'm like, "Do you know who I am?" And Instagram is what caused that. So, yay!
Of course. Hi, Teresa. Yeah, because I saw you. So we share a common interest in oceans. Growing up in the Caribbean, I'm from Jamaica. I went to UWI. I studied marine zoology. That was the first, my first foot into even venturing into aquaculture was first fisheries. And, the love for the ocean, it stays with you no matter where you go. I mean, I have traveled and I'm always unhappy when I'm far from the ocean. So it's really important, the sustainability of our seas. And we know what is going on. It's been talked about how we have overfishing. And my interest is I got into aquaculture, been in the space for 20 years. But I don't think along the way we really focused on environment. And that's a topic that has come forth a lot more now. And we see, where not taking care of the environment is coming forth. Oh, and before I continue, how was it with Elsa? I forgot the hurricane.
Elsa had a lot of bark and a little bit of bite, but I don't think it was as severe as it could have been. We did have a lot of rain and it caused quite some damage, especially in the regular flood-prone areas. But we didn't get a lot of the wind that was associated with it, so we should count ourselves super lucky in that regard.
Right. But it is hurricane season.
Yes, and I mean, usually July is just a month of us watching whatever else is happening in the Caribbean, and we wait until September for when, the big ones come and we get worried. But to have to prepare for a storm in July, I was like, okay.
Ready, right?
Yeah. Yes, I bought lots of snacks, that's all.
No toilet paper.
Already stocked up, already. COVID made sure that we just kept everything stocked up from before.
So can you introduce yourself and tell me about what you studied, what you're currently studying, what is your interest in the environment, how you got into that space?
Sure. I work as an environmental, I guess, consultant. I used to work for Environmental Solutions Limited for 3 years until I got accepted to a PhD program at James Cook University in Australia, for which I got a scholarship, which that was
Congratulations.
great. Thank you. So I wanted to be able to focus primarily on my PhD, so I kind of just do like consulting on the side or research assistance on the side, more specifically. I did my first degree in zoology and botany, but you know when you go to UWI, that really means marine
Right,
science. Well,
exactly.
yeah, well, marine or freshwater. I was more marine. And yeah, as you said, growing up on an island, you kind of are confronted with the environment every day, whether it's through a forest, a beach, you know, all these trees around. And so you just learn to have an appreciation for it. And from very early, I was an advocate and very interested in environmental conservation. I got my first degree long, long donkey years ago, and then I ventured off to do other things and found my way back when I did my master's in marine biology at James Cook University. And yeah, I just figure, listen, if you have the knowledge and you have a skill set that's very hybrid to me, that's beneficial to the conservation space, then, you know, my kind of core value is around environmental conservation for the benefit of everyone, not just well,
Right,
not just how we see the environment as a separate entity, but because we are all essentially a part of the environment. The environment will be fine at the end of the day. It's just that we
right.
might not be here to enjoy it or
Exactly.
enjoy it in the same way. So I try to, you know, dedicate my work to that. And my PhD is it's gonna support the Great Barrier Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program. Great Barrier Reef is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's just been declared in danger. It's of incredible cultural and economic value to Australians, Indigenous and
Right.
white alike. So they have come up with a program to introduce some interventions to help to support the reef. And my research is going to look at kind of the social side of that, which is how people perceive risk, how their intersectionality, so the intersection of their race and gender, culture, power, etc., how those things work together to inform how they perceive risk and how they will um, accept certain interventions, if at all, basically. So,
That's
in a nutshell.
fantastic. I think that's going to be very relatable around the world. And in that aspect, I mean, living in Jamaica, which is going to be your your opinion, how do you think people are perceiving the environmental science? Is still something that people think it's all frou-frou, or is it a reality now that people are really beginning to understand about the environment?
Yeah, I don't think that environmental awareness and conservation is where it needs to be yet. There's always going to be work that needs to be done. However, I do think that small kind of avenues into environmental conservation have helped people to understand issues, things like plastic waste reduction. It's very visible to the eye. So when you go around and see all of the solid waste that has accumulated, then you know that that's not how it's supposed to be. And so you are aware because of that. But in terms of climate change and the impacts that we are already experiencing and are set to experience, I don't know that people are where they are yet. There is some base level of understanding that, yeah, this is not right. But I think awareness should always be towards advocacy or action, right? And so a
Right.
lot of people are aware, but they're not acting at the moment. And we need collective action to address these issues, I think, personally.
Sure, definitely. No, they say that it's the bigger countries that are responsible for, what is happening in the environment. So we know about oil, etc. But what can the Caribbean region do? Or is the Caribbean region contributing to some of these, other than plastic, some of these environmental problems?
I mean, we have our own environmental challenges that we induce upon ourselves, I guess, kind of overfishing and pollution and those kinds of things. Those are things that we have in our power to control. It's still important for people to be aware and to take action because our leaders represent us on the global platform. We are a small island developing state. And we need to come together really to punch above our weight when we're looking at the G6 and whoever else,
Right.
that has all of that power to make these kinds of decisions. So if you take the example, for example, of the IPCC report, which is the International Panel of Climate Change, don't quote me on that. I'm not great with abbreviations. But
We'll look it up.
yeah, essentially, this is it's a report that's done to sensitize people to the impacts of climate change scenarios, like a 2-degree increase or a 3-degree increase,
Okay.
and really and truly, a 2-degree increase in temperature over the mean norm. So for the Caribbean, 1.5 was really our threshold. Like, we're already experiencing impacts. When we get to 1.5 degrees in increase in temperature above the mean, we are in big trouble. So our leaders and decision makers and policymakers actually had to come together to bring that issue to the international stage so that we could begin to publicize and sensitize larger audiences to those impacts and to that scenario. So people need to be aware as individual citizens so that they can challenge their decision makers, challenge their politicians, ensure that issues on climate change are being addressed when and where they need to. Because I can't do it and you can't do it. We are individuals walking around every day feeling the impacts. So those who have the influence and the power to discuss it where it needs to be discussed and to take action, we need to push those people to do that. Right now, climate change is not a hot topic issue for our Jamaican government. Yes.
Really? Okay.
I mean, yes, we are signatories to this and, a part of that, and we've submitted our NDCs. But I personally still think that there is more that we can do as Jamaica, as the Caribbean, and as the Latam region to push on the global stage for climate action.
Well, perhaps maybe so in terms of, my field, aquaculture, fish farming and agriculture in general, perhaps it's not really something that's discussed. How does climate change affect farming? Right?
Absolutely.
That's a very important topic to start talking about. When we have these hurricanes, high winds, flooding, what happens to the food in open space?
Yeah.
If you're not thinking about, climate change on a big scale, but it is happening that our waters are becoming warmer. Is that correct? And we're having harsher hurricanes.
Yep.
So
no, go ahead, finish.
No,
sorry.
So I want you to correct me on the environmental part, but as I see that as something that farmers and the aquaculture space should start thinking about. And like you said, we have to get together to talk about this, because if you don't see it as something important, this is actually a reality during hurricane season.
Yeah. So really, climate change, we are experiencing it now. We're in the climate crisis. We're in the climate emergency, right? So planning ideally should have started however long ago, but we can still start today. Land-based farmers as well as marine or water-based farmers, including aquaculture, are incredibly sensitive to the impacts of climate change, whether it is from drought, heavy rainfall, as you said, high winds. The species that you're trying to farm can be impacted. You might have an increase in the proliferation of different types of bacteria or diseases because temperatures are rising.
That's right.
You have hurricanes that will come through, of course, and that's seasonal. And we are expecting more frequent storms as well as more intense storms as the years go on. All kinds of impacts come from it. You have increase in vector-borne illnesses and waterborne illnesses that come out of climate change. There's occupational health and safety issues related to your workers that are farming there. They have increased exposure to harsher conditions, rain, heat, those kinds of things. So those are things to consider. It's important for farmers to understand what their sensitivity is to these types of impacts. So you might not be experiencing drought. That's not an issue for you. It doesn't mean you don't have any issues. So it's important for you to get very granular, down to the small scale when you're talking about climate change, especially for farmers, because especially when you look at it from the Sustainable Development Goals achievement, we have goals
Yes.
that climate change is going to be impacting food security, life below water, land, life on land. These are all SDG goals that climate change will interrupt,
Right,
So
right.
yeah, it's important for all avenues. So not just farmers on their own, but farmers, academics, scientists, policymakers, governments, technicians. We all have to, and I think we have enough knowledge now, right?
Yes,
Across those
yes,
groups
there
of
is enough
people.
knowledge. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think the problem
No,
is implementing. Like I am not sure, and that's something I'd like farmers to, have an input. Is this in their planning? Like when,
exactly.
especially for people who are new and coming into the space as well, people want to get into farming and aquaculture all the time. Are you planning for impending climate change? Are
Precisely.
you planning for the heat and the winds and the rain, flooding in your system and putting that in? And like you said, it's something that maybe now they should be going to their MP or the politicians and having them put that on the table for them to bring it to the big countries to let them understand that what they're doing is also affecting, the region. So I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
yeah. So,
I'd love to hear from them.
agreed. I've seen, so our Minister for Fisheries, Agriculture, and the blah, 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 Floyd Green, I've seen that he is very aware and cognizant of climate change and the impacts it will have on his particular sector. And so, he's come up with things like insurance for farmers.
Okay.
So these are all things that it should all form a part of your climate adaptation plan, right? So how am I going to
I like that
survive these impacts?
climate adaptation plan. I like that one.
Absolutely. Right. So that's basically, so when you're looking at, and I'm not the expert on this, Teresa joined, she's a real climate expert, but I learned a
Okay.
lot from
Hi,
her. So
Teresa.
so essentially, when you're looking at your vulnerability to climate change impacts, we look at, okay, where are you located and what are you going to experience based on that location, which is what I was saying earlier. Is it drought? Is it extreme heat, extreme rain, all of the above? Then you look at, okay, how am I already dealing with these things? When it comes, does everything just mash up? Do I have a plan in
Right.
place to help me be resilient and recover after these impacts? And then when you look at those aspects together, it determines how vulnerable you really are. How is it really going to impact you? How long is it going to take you to recover? How are you going to bounce back? All of these things contribute to your vulnerability to climate change. So your climate adaptation plan essentially addresses your vulnerability and helps to build your adaptive capacity. So like we said, things like insurance, things like what species you're farming, things like
Mm,
where you are farming. Are you putting in disaster risk mitigation measures? So do you have
mm.
mitigation for flood? Do you have, where are you storing your feed or
Exactly. Where are
your,
you going to put them
all
in
of
an
these things?
emergency? Yeah.
All of these things will form a part of your adaptation plans. How are you going to be able to cope with the impacts of climate change down the line? So these are the conversations that need to be more mainstream. It can't
Yes.
be an afterthought like, oh crap,
No.
a hurricane is coming. What are we going to do?
And I think that's always the case. I think over the years, perhaps because the hurricanes weren't as frequent. I remember growing up, maybe I had two, but when they were bad at the time. For me, it was Gilbert.
Yeah,
But yeah,
same.
I never forget Gilbert. But I think people or farmers, maybe, okay, it's a hurricane. But I think it's time to change that narrative and put it in the plan and be preventative. Or if you realize that you're not, like you said, if you put the plan in and you realize that you're very vulnerable to figure out how and what tools and what do I need to prepare myself for the future. You cannot invest so much time, so much money
Mhm.
for it to be just wiped away.
Exactly. Dion in the chat raised a good point. What about energy security? How do you balance energy security with reducing environmental impacts? And that is a very topical question, because solar, for example, which is a form of renewable energy, also has environmental impact. So as a farmer, you might be like,
Okay.
okay, I want to implement solar
Yeah.
panels on my farm. Okay,
Right.
you need space to do that, right? So
Mm.
the environmental impact comes where do you have to sacrifice some of the area that you're going to be using for your farming if you're a land-based aquaculture farmer, or if you are a mariculture person, where are you going to put those solar panels? How much energy is it really going to give you at the end of the day? Because you have to think about energy storage. Solar
Right.
um, is really dependent on the amount of energy that you're able to store from what you've captured through your PV
Right.
panels. So all of this has to come into your climate adaptation plan, right? Like, it's a very
Mm.
open and frank discussion with all of your respective stakeholders, the farmers, the investor, if you have any, your community members, your family, your MP, everybody has to be involved
Everybody.
in this discussion about
Right.
climate adaptation. It's not an isolated kind of thing, and it has to discuss the art of the possible. So, is it just money that you need? Maybe. Do you need to move your farm? Maybe. Like, are you even able to farm this particular species based on the
Right.
impacts that you're going to experience? Maybe not.
And that's the
So you
first
have
thing
to.
they should be thinking about in the first place.
Exactly. So you see where the adaptation planning comes in. It's all the way at the front of this conversation, because it's not impossible to have it once your farm is already established. It is better to have a plan than to not. But the
Before.
best time is to, when you are even thinking about it, is to discuss the impacts of climate change and how you're planning for those impacts, essentially.
Right, right. Just like any other business, and it should be seen as a business that you
Mm-hmm.
have a plan in place, some sort of along with the business plan, this environmental, what is it, climate action plan?
Climate adaptation plan.
Climate adaptation plan needs to be
Yeah.
in place as a part of it. And another part of the environmental aspects we were talking about with some of the farmers is when they're planning, where do their chemicals, treatments, where does that go?
Yeah.
How is
Yeah.
that impacting the water table? How is that impacting the surrounding lands? Are they
Yeah.
using it properly? So that's another plan. Do you have another name for that one?
Yes, there is. We usually develop an environmental management and monitoring plan for any type of industry or any type of activity that's going to have a list of adverse environmental impacts. So, yeah, for aquaculture farming, we look at, are you using hormones, antibacterial products, I think, any chemicals,
Yeah,
right?
antibiotics, which we should be
Antibiotics, right?
using. We should not be using that, people.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, right? I did aquaculture when I did my first degree. That's a long time ago. I won't say how long. So I'm not even sure exactly what the standards are at the moment, but it has impacts on your water quality, your air quality. It might have noise
Humans,
impact, human
humans,
health.
we're going to be talking about that another time. You should not be using antibiotics.
There you go. So you have to look at where is you have the waste from the species that you are farming. Where is that going to go? How is it going to be treated? How are you going to know if it's meeting water quality standards? What's your
True.
process for receiving complaints from the nearby communities that it might be impacting? So all of that comes into your environmental management and monitoring plan. Hopefully you would have done an environmental and social impact assessment, which essentially looks at all of the possible positive and negative impacts that could come out of establishing a farm in a particular location. And we come up with the mitigation measures. So how do we prevent the adverse impacts, scale them down? So when we identify the impacts, we look at how long they're supposed to last, whether or not they're reversible. Is it a large scale or a small scale? So whether or not it's going to impact the whole community versus just that area. And then we come up with mitigative actions. Your management and monitoring plan is going to be based on the results of your environmental and social impact assessment, which in and of itself is supposed to be a stakeholder document. So the whole way that you come up with what the impacts are is through robust and continued stakeholder engagement. You talk to the people in the community, you talk to the technical experts, you talk to your environmental regulators to come up with, okay, what is really going to be the impact of establishing this farm here, and what is going to be the impact on the environment to this farm. So if you have a land-based aquaculture farm, but you're in a flood-prone area, that is something that we would identify.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Or so landslide area. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. So how, I mean, where would somebody get that information from?
Okay, so environmental and social impact assessments are usually conducted. Well, firstly, if you are looking into establishing an aquaculture farm anywhere, you would need to, if you're in Jamaica, go and have a discussion with the National Environmental and Planning Agency, NEPA, and they would tell you whether or not an EIA is required, an EIA, an environmental impact assessment, is required based on the business plan or the project brief for your particular farm. So what size, what you're going to farm, what's the yield, what's the effluent, what's your waste going to look like, your byproducts, all of that. And then you as a farmer or investor in this business would have to seek out an environmental consultant like myself, who would go in and use a terms of reference that is developed. So like your scope of work that's developed between you and the regulator to tell you what you need to go and look for in terms of impact. So there are biological impact, social impact, physical impact, socioeconomic impact. And that scope of work is detailed by the regulator, and the environmental consultant will go out and do this environmental and social impact assessment, right? It's supposed to be a very objective assessment. So whoever is doing the assessment is not doing it to make sure that the farm actually happens. They are here to say, okay, can this farm actually happen? And if it can, what can we put in place to make sure that there are minimal environmental and social risks, right? So you get your EIA documents, your EIA statements, you get an environmental management and monitoring plan, which might have a whole host of other plans associated with it. Water quality management, biodiversity management, emergency management, occupational health and safety management. So it's a full document that covers people, animals, water, air, noise, everything to ensure that risk is minimized and controlled.
So, okay, so if I work with ornamental fish farmers, because this is not just about fish, right? Aquaculture, aquatic foods, or not only aquatic foods, but aquaculture in general is the farming of any kind of animal or plant, right? In water. So we have a huge sector for ornamental fish. And a lot of them are backyard. So they might hear this and think, oh, this is going to cost too much money. Because that's the first thing. It's cost too much money. But is there something in place for like a backyard farm? Because I think even having in the backyard is really important, because you have your house right there, or you have kids around, you have your pets around. Are you thinking about these kinds of things, the treatments and the chemicals? Is there something that can be in place for the small farmer that's cost effective, to let them understand how important this is, and not something to just bypass because it costs too much money?
Yeah, the money issue is it's a significant one. I mean, environmental consultants, I think it comes across as expensive because it has the word environment in there.
It sounds very like, oh, this environment is, but we need people to understand this is just not an elitist term. This is not an elitist term. It is something that is real and important for where you live. Like you said, your family, your kids, the animals around, and the immediate surrounding environment. That is something that's really needs to be start looking into.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little difficult to regulate for backyard farmers, to be honest. I would say if they have a concern about a particular impact that they have noticed, so I don't know, people in their household are getting sick or their fish keep dying or whatever the case is, you will have to call in an expert. You can call in the National Environmental Planning Agency
Okay.
to see if they are able to do a water quality assessment or something like that.
Okay.
Or, you know, you don't have to do a full-scale EIA with an environmental consultant. As I said, you can ask them to address very specific issues or have them develop a plan for you where you can mitigate some of the impacts, an environmental management and monitoring plan. I won't lie to say it's not going to cost any money. It will cost money at the end of the day. However, again, if you're trying to control that risk, if you've already started experiencing impacts, then it's important for you to understand the range of those impacts so that, you know, you mitigate
Put it in your
any
plan.
negative.
Just like
Yeah,
everything else, you have to consider food, medicine, energy. So it has to be a part of the plan, and you have to understand the costs a
yeah,
part of the plan.
exactly. Precisely. So even as, like I said, from the get-go, when you're saying, okay, I want to become an
A fish
ornamental fish farmer,
farmer, yeah,
these are the things that you have
should be
to think
looking
about.
at. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Like all the costs associated, and this is one cost that maybe gets left behind, but it's actually one of the most important costs even before beginning. You know, you should
Yeah.
say, okay, this I know I need to spend money on this. This is very important for the long run. So
Well, the
yeah,
truth is, it's like your health, right? At some point, it
right.
is going to cost you. So,
Yeah,
are you going to pay the money now to go to the doctor, or are you going to sit down and get sick and then experience other types of costs at the end of the day? It's the same, right? The environment can get sick. So, are you going to
right.
take preventative measures prior to, or handle the costs when it has either spiraled out of control or already had a large, you know, negative impact? I'm not
Right.
trying to sound doom and gloom, but the truth
No, no,
is,
that's important. That's really
yes,
important because one of my mantras is when I'm teaching is that prevention is better than cure. Once you have a disease
100%.
in your facility, it's one of the hardest things to get out. And then you're going to be dumping chemicals into, and that's a whole nother story. So this is, I mean, I love hearing about this. I love hearing about the plans because
Yeah,
that's something that I think that really needs to be implemented as a part of prevention.
yeah,
Um, before
yeah. So
beginning to put all the things in place to prevent disease, to prevent, you know, other disasters in the future. So I think this is great.
absolutely. I'm good. I'm happy to hear that. Yeah. So I don't know what the process is like for when you have decided to that you want to go into aquaculture, whichever form that might take. But as I said, from inception, you know, the information that is passed to that person who's interested has to include environmental and climate change and disaster risk reduction and all of these things because it it determines the sustainability of your business and of your investment. So we don't want you to go into farming and then literally 2 years down the line, you've wasted your time and your money
Right.
because bigger issues have overtaken you, right? You have to, like I said, consider all of these things from inception and have plans, plural, on how you're going to handle these things or whether or not it can even happen where you want to
Right.
happen
Yes.
because, you
You
know,
should know this
of,
before. Like, can it really happen before you start spending your money?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
really important. It's very interesting.
Hmm.
So Danny,
So,
you're started. So you have a consulting company, or you do consulting.
uh, so at the moment it's kind of watery. As I said, I was with Environmental Solutions Limited, where I work as an environmental analyst. And I've since gone out to focus on my PhD, but because I firmly believe like knowledge has to be applied. Like it's good to go and do
Yeah.
a PhD and be academic, but then what are you going to do with that information? So I'm still trying to stay within the environmental consulting field. Doing a few projects for ESL now that I'm part-time or on the outside with them. And so if anybody else needs an environmental specialist,
I'm going to tag
I'm
you for
available.
sure because I think this is something really important. Um, Again, I'm
Yeah.
not sure how knowledgeable all these plans that you've talked about is known. And I'm really happy to hear about this. And I'm going to tag it and I'm going to like comment on it. So I have it in the down below when I post it to make sure
Perfect.
you can correct me in the comments if
No
anything.
problem, no problem. Happy to, happy to. Yeah, it's really important. Planning,
Yeah,
again, planning and implementation, correct and appropriate implementation of your plan is really the way to reduce your risk of disaster. And disasters are not natural. They are completely and totally man-made, as in nature is always going to be there. Nature is always going to have an impact on us. The disaster comes in where we are unprepared or where we have
mhm.
not taken measures to prevent
Right,
that particular disaster, right? So
right,
we have to think ahead. We have to be prepared. And that comes in planning and making sure that you have the resources to be able to implement your plan appropriately to reduce your risk of a disaster.
right. I never thought about it that way. I really like that. See, I've learned so much from you.
I have also recently learned these things. I'm just spreading the message along.
So we're going to
Absolutely.
try to see, I'm going to learn from more farmers to see if they know about this, and
Yeah,
in the future to try to start putting it into practice.
yeah.
Because these hurricanes are not going away.
No,
So we
no.
need to start preparing for the farms and for the future.
Yeah,
So
and truth be told, we don't even need a direct hit from a hurricane, as we've seen in the past. Ivan, I don't even think, no, Gilbert didn't actually hit us, right? I don't think, no, it
no, it
did.
did.
It did.
I remember.
It did. Sorry. But the fact
I
is,
I'm way older than you, so I was there. I
I don't know about that, but the truth is, we don't need the eye of a hurricane to pass over us. We don't need it to be
remember. No,
even
and
a
that was a
hurricane.
three, right? And they're
That
getting up
was
to
a,
five. They're now
that is
fives,
correct.
right?
Yes,
Recently, and that was so bad. That three, I can't even believe it's a three now. So
yeah.
five, oh my God,
hmm
no. So yeah, we
And
have to
and
start.
sorry to cut, but even last year when we had Zeta and Eta, which were south of us, the rains that it brought, it might not have impacted your actual farm and your infrastructure, but it impacted your roads and your electricity and all of these things. So
There
it
you
is going
go.
to have an impact
There
on
you
your
go.
operation. So
Yeah.
plan, be prepared. That's what I have to say.
This was lovely. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to meet you. And I'm sure I'm going to
Same.
be talking again in the future when I get more farmers
I
on
hope
board.
so. Please, please. This is the only way for us to really get the message across is to just keep talking in these very open environments and media.
Platforms. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I love
So thank you
it.
very much for having me
Thank
again.
you.
It's always such a pleasure when people are like, Danny, I saw your profile. You want to talk? Yes, of course I
Yes,
do.
yes. We need it. We need, like you said, we need to keep talking about it and using
Yeah,
social media for good in a positive space to bring the message across to people who are not really getting it. And so I'm trying to like bring it to the grassroots and to the people who really need it. So that's
awesome. That's
my
really great.
thing.
Thank you. That's really
Okay.
great.
Bye. Have a great
Bye. Have a
day.
great day. Bye.